My question is, what tools are useful when contributing to Python open source projects? I've done Python programming for quite a long time, but it's only recently that I've really started contributing a lot to open source Python packages. And I found that there's like a whole set of tools that you end up using a lot more when contributing to packages that you may not be using in your own, personal Python projects or even your work Python projects, depending on what you do. So I just want to put a plug for those tools to give everyone a heads up. The first one is actually how documentation is usually written. I think a lot of us, when we write documentation, we think of like writing a GitHub README, and there we're using Markdown, MD files. But in fact, lots of the documentation out there is written using Sphinx, which is a tool that the language it uses is called restructured text, or RST. So the files you see are RST. And it's actually, I actually really like it. I wrote a book using it, this kind of handbook book way back in the day, like 10, 15 years ago, using RST. It's more powerful, more expressive than Markdown, and it's more extensible. And that's, I think, why it's so popular to write, documentation, books, etc. And a lot of the Python projects use it. So that's one of the first things you might do, because a lot of times the first thing we do when we contribute is we write documentation. Like here was a PR from someone, someone's first PR to Matplotlib, and it was, making this documentation change. And this is in fact RST. It looks similar to Markdown. Some of the things are the same, like the way you do bulleted lists, but the way it does links is actually quite different. So that is something that you might end up using, and, you can go through the RST primer here and learn a lot. And you can also just learn by looking through a code base and seeing how they're already writing things. That's usually one of the best ways to learn it, just in case they have anything that's specific to that code base. Another tool to talk about is Tox. Tox is a tool that can run lots and lots of tools in different environments. Yeah, so here you see Tox is for automation and standardized testing. So a lot of projects use Tox in order to run a whole bunch of things across other environments. And it was particularly helpful, especially before, GitHub Actions made it easy to run things against matrices. But a lot of the projects that I've worked with have used Tox. For example, like with Flask SQL Alchemy, when we dropped Python 3.7 support, I had to update quite a few files, and one of those was the Tox file, which is tox.ini. And so I had to, this was pretty easy to update. I just had to remove the 7. But there were definitely times that I had to learn about all the other different syntax in Tox in order to, use an environment or modify an environment. So Tox is another useful tool. I also find myself using mypy or pyright a lot more. Typically mypy, both of these are type checkers. And a lot of times Python packages will have type annotations because they're really helpful for IntelliSense and editors. And if the types aren't right, a lot of times we get bugs. So some of the first issues are actually, for many people, are improving type annotations. So here's an example where I improved a type hint in Flask SQL Alchemy. And so you can see here, fairly small change, and then adding a little test for it here. But in order to make sure that this was correct, I had to run mypy against the code. And in this case, I ran mypy using Tox because that's what I was set up. But there's other projects in which I just run mypy straight. And I've had to learn a lot about type annotations, and they can actually get really hairy for Python, since Python is, kind of a duck type language. And so in order to support the flexibility of Python type annotations can get really complex. So I always go to the mypy documentation when I am trying to, figure out something. I go here first, and if I can't figure it out from here, then I go searching. But it's always good to have this mypy cheat sheet up. Definitely really helpful. Another tool that is used by lots and lots of packages is Pytest for testing. Pytest it's great. It's really powerful. There's lots of plugins for it. And of course, if you're making a Python package, you do want to test it. So here you can see with my very large PR to change Flask SQL Alchemy to support SQL Alchemy 2.0, I ended up like most of my PR actually was tests, which is good. I think it's a good thing when most of my PR is tests. And the thing that I did that really bolted up was parameterizing tests in order to future back proof it, to make sure that it's really working for all the different permutations that a developer might, pass in. So that's something to keep in mind, is that not just writing, a simple test, but parameterizing tests in order to check for lots of situations. So that's a really helpful tool as well, Pytest. The final tool I want to plug is Git. I've been using Git for a long time, but using Git for a package is like, a whole other ball game. It's, you often have to, do a few more things that you might not do on your personal projects. Like for me, I don't usually rebase, but for other projects, they've asked me to do rebase. But fortunately, like David Lord from the Palettes project, he said, like, don't worry, there's always a way to undo. It's okay, you can mess up. And so that's been very empowering for me, knowing that in theory, there's a way to undo things, hopefully so far. So that's something I've experienced as well, is like, learning new Git workflows, other ways of using Git that I wouldn't normally inflict on myself in a personal project. But it's been great. I mean, and that's one of the great things about contributing to open source Python projects, is learning new tools and new ways of doing things. And it's always a great learning experience. So highly recommend it.